Lila, don't do this. Max breathed out softly, his voice faltering. Yet his hands didn't pull away from her skin as their bodies intertwined in the dark. The desire in the air seemed to tighten around them, making each breath heavier. She could feel his body trembling, the heat radiating from him, as she couldn't stop, couldn't pull away. But I want to, Lila whispered, her lips trembling as they brushed against his neck. Nothing but the urge building inside her chest. All she knew in that moment was hunger, a loss of control, and Max, her little brother, the one she hadn't seen in so long, now like an unquenchable flame. Oh! The air crackled with anticipation as I hauled my suitcase down the cracked pavement of my hometown's sleepy streets. The kind of place where secrets festered beneath the surface of picket fences and faded porches. I'd hatched the plan on a whim, surprise my parents, slip back into the life I'd left behind at university, and bask in their stunned, joyful faces. At 20 I craved that rush, the kind that jolted you awake after months of grinding through lectures and late-night cramming. My heart thumped hard against my ribs, a wild drumbeat of excitement, as I pictured Mom's shriek, Dad's bare hug swallowing me whole. But when I shoved open the front door of our weathered two-story house, the silence hit me like a punch, sharp, hollow, and cold. No clatter of pots from the kitchen, no muffled TV chatter. Just stillness, thick and heavy, clinging to the peeling wallpaper and the scuffed hardwood floor. I stood there, suitcase sagging at my feet, the thrill draining out of me like water through a sieve. Then a voice sliced through the quiet, bright, familiar, laced with a grin I could hear before I saw it. Lila! My name rolled off his tongue, and I spun around to find Max, my little brother, leaning in the doorway to the living room. 18 now, he'd shot up taller than me, his frame filling out with a lean, quiet strength I hadn't clocked before. His sandy hair flopped over his forehead, and his hazel eyes sparkled with that same mischief I remembered from when we'd raced bikes down Elm Street. Max! I yelped, dropping my bags with a thud as I threw myself into his arms. He caught me easily, his laugh rumbling against my chest, and for a second it was like no time had passed, until I pulled back and really looked at him. The boy I'd left behind was gone. This Max had broader shoulders, a sharper jaw, a presence that tugged at something deep in me I couldn't name. He wandered off to grab a soda from the fridge, leaving me alone in the foyer. I shut the door with a soft click, the sound echoing in the empty house, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The familiar scent of home, wood polish, faint lavender from Mom's candles, a hint of Dad's old cigars, wrapped around me, grounding me after the chaos of my journey. The trip back had been a blur of packed buses, their seats sticky with sweat, and train stations buzzing with shouted announcements and stale coffee fumes. My body ached, a dull throb in my shoulders and legs, and I needed to shed it all, the grime, the exhaustion, the weight of a semester that had chewed me up and spit me out. I dragged myself upstairs, the creak of each step a quiet welcome, and made a beeline for the bathroom. The shower was salvation. Hot water blasted my skin, steam curling up in thick tendrils as I tipped my head back, letting it scald away the layers of travel and stress. My muscles unwound, the tension melting off me in rivulets, and I stood there longer than I needed to, eyes closed, breathing in the damp heat. For the first time in weeks I felt human again. Not a machine churning through deadlines and exams, but just Lila, bare and raw under the spray. When I finally stepped out, the mirror was fogged over, my reflection a blurry ghost. I swiped it clear, catching a glimpse of myself, dark hair plastered to my neck, green eyes wide and a little wild. I wrapped a towel around me, the cotton soft against my flushed skin, and padded to my room. Pushing open the door was like stepping into a time capsule. The walls still bore my old band posters, edges curling from years of humidity, and my bed sat there, neatly made with the same floral sheets I'd loved at 16. Sunlight streamed through the window, dust motes dancing in the golden haze, and I tossed my towel aside to slip into a loose sundress, pale blue, light as a whisper, the kind of thing you wore when you didn't care who saw you. Barefoot, I sank onto the mattress, the springs groaning faintly under my weight, and let the quiet of the room settle over me. But beneath that calm, something gnawed at me, a restless itch I couldn't scratch. University had been a whirlwind, classes, part-time jobs, roommates who never shut up, but it had left no room for me. No space for intimacy, for connection, for anything beyond fleeting hookups in cramped dorms with walls so thin you could hear every breath. I'd been running on empty and now sprawled across my childhood bed. I felt the absence keenly. My phone buzzed beside me and I picked it up, scrolling through meaningless feeds, memes, selfies, noise. But my mind drifted, restless, hungry. I tossed the phone aside and lay back, staring at the ceiling where glow-in-the-dark stars still clung from years ago. My hands moved before I told them to, grazing my arms, tracing the dip of my collarbone, the soft hem of my dress brushing my thighs. It wasn't about anyone else. It was about me, reclaiming something I'd lost in the grind. My fingers slid lower, tentative at first, then bolder, and my breath hitched, shaky and alive. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, as I let myself unravel, my body waking up under my own touch. I was lost in it, pulse pounding in my ears, when a sharp knock jolted me upright. My heart slammed into my throat, and I yanked my hands back, scrambling to sit up as Max's voice cut through the door. "Lila." "Yeah, come in," I called, smoothing my dress with trembling fingers, my voice steadier than I felt. The door creaked open and Max stepped inside, hesitating in the threshold. His usual easy grin was gone, replaced by something heavier, his brows knit tight. He crossed the room slowly, his sneakers scuffing the floor, and perched on the edge of my bed, running a hand through his hair. I could see it now, the weight on him, the way his shoulders slumped just a fraction. I stayed quiet, giving him room to breathe, to spill whatever was eating at him. When he finally spoke, his words stumbled out, rough and halting. "It's about Sarah," he said, his girlfriend's name dropping like a stone between us. I'd heard about her before, bits and pieces over texts, the kind of young love that sounded invincible. But now Max's voice cracked as he unraveled the truth. They'd been fighting, he said, nonstop, over dumb stuff like who texted first and bigger stuff he couldn't even pin down. "She's mad all the time, Lila. Like, nothing I do's enough." His hands clenched into fists on his knees, and he stared at them, like they held the answers he couldn't find. "I care about her, but it's exhausting. I don't know if I can keep this up." I watched him, really watched him, and it hit me hard. Max wasn't the kid I'd left behind. He'd grown into this quiet intensity, his face sharper, his voice deeper, carrying a maturity that snuck up on me. His hazel eyes flicked up to mine, searching, and I felt a pull, something magnetic and unsettling. He kept talking, spilling more than I'd ever heard from him, how he always ended up apologizing, how he'd thought about ending it but couldn't pull the trigger. His vulnerability cracked something open in me, and before I could overthink it, I leaned in, wrapping my arms around him. It wasn't a casual hug. It was tight, real, my chin resting on his shoulder as I breathed him in, clean soap, a hint of cedar from his cologne. He stiffened for a split second, then melted into it, his arms circling me back. The air shifted, grew heavy, and I don't know when it changed, when my hand slid up to his hair, threading through the soft strands, or when my fingers brushed the line of his jaw, rough with faint stubble. His breath caught and I felt it, the way he leaned into my touch, subtle but there. My pulse raced, a wild thrum under my skin, and I didn't stop, couldn't stop. I took his hand, guided it to my leg, the hem of my dress riding up just enough. He froze, his fingers hovering, then settled, warm and tentative against my thigh. "Max," I whispered, barely audible, and his eyes locked on mine, wide and uncertain but burning with something else. His hand moved, slow at first, tracing small circles that sent sparks skittering up my spine. I shifted closer, my face brushing his neck, his pulse hammering against my lips. My hands roamed his shoulders, his chest, every touch electric, every breath a shared rhythm. His fingers climbed higher, bolder now, and I arched into it, heat pooling low in my belly. The room shrank to just us, the world outside fading to static, until the front door slammed open downstairs. I jerked back, heart lurching, yanking my dress down as Max scrambled away, his face flushed crimson. "Lila? You here?" Mom's voice rang out, sharp with worry and excitement, and I bolted upright, smoothing my hair as I stumbled to my feet. "Up here," I shouted, forcing a smile as I raced downstairs, Max trailing behind. My parents swarmed me, Mom's arms crushing me, Dad's booming laugh filling the foyer, and I played along, dodging their questions with a laugh about wanting to surprise them. But as we sat down to dinner, the clink of forks against plates couldn't drown out the echo of Max's touch, the way my skin still buzzed where his hands had been. I stole glances at him across the table, his eyes catching mine for a fleeting second before darting away, and I wondered if he felt it too, the pull, the heat, the unspoken question hanging between us. Equals. Dinner dragged on, a haze of small talk and forced smiles. Mom rattled on about the neighbor's new dog, a yappy little thing that barked at shadows, while Dad shoveled mashed potatoes onto his plate, grumbling about work. The dining room glowed soft under the old chandelier, its bulbs casting a warm amber light that danced across the chipped oak table. I nodded along, my fork scraping against my plate, but my mind was miles away, back in my room, tangled up in the memory of Max's hands, the way they'd hesitated then pressed into my skin like he couldn't help himself. I could still feel the ghost of his touch, a phantom heat that lingered on my thigh, and it made my chest tight, my breath shallow. Across the table, Max sat hunched over his food, pushing peas around with his fork like they'd personally offended him. His hair fell into his eyes, and every so often, he'd flick it back with a quick jerk of his head, a nervous tick I hadn't noticed before. Our gazes collided once, twice, each time a jolt of something sharp and unspoken zipping between us. His cheeks were still faintly pink, and I wondered if he was replaying it too, the way our breathing had synced, the way my dress had bunched under his fingers. I shifted in my seat, the wooden chair creaking, and pressed my legs together, trying to smother the restless ache building there. Mom's voice cut through my haze. "Lila, you okay? You're quiet tonight." And I plastered on a grin, muttering something about being tired from the trip. She bought it, or at least didn't push, and the conversation rolled on without me. Later, after the dishes were stacked in the sink and the house settled into its nighttime hush, I retreated to my room. The air was thick with summer heat. The window cracked open, letting in a faint breeze that carried the scent of cut grass and distant barbecue smoke. I flopped onto my bed, the sheets cool against my bare legs, and stared at the ceiling, those stupid glow-in-the-dark stars mocking me with their faded light. Sleep wouldn't come. My body was wired, buzzing like a live wire, every nerve still humming from earlier. I tossed and turned, the mattress creaking under me, my sundress twisting around my hips. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Max, his hazel eyes dark with something I couldn't name, his lips parting as his breath hitched. My hand drifted again, slipping under the hem of my dress, and I let it, chasing that fleeting spark from before. But it wasn't enough. Not after what had happened, not after feeling him so close. Downstairs, the TV murmured faintly, Dad's late-night news ritual, and I heard Mom's footsteps padding to their room. The house was settling, but I wasn't. That pull, that need, gnawed at me relentless, and I couldn't shake it. I sat up, heart thudding, and swung my legs over the side of the bed. The hardwood was cool under my feet as I crept to the door, peering out into the dim hallway. Max's room was just across from mine, the door ajar, a sliver of light spilling out from the lamp on his nightstand. I could hear the soft rustle of sheets, the faint creak of his bed as he shifted. My pulse raced, a wild drumbeat in my throat, and before I could talk myself out of it, I was moving silent, barefoot, drawn like a moth to a flame. I pushed his door open wider, the hinges groaning softly, and stepped inside. His room smelled like him, cedar cologne, a hint of sweat, the sharp tang of the energy drinks he loved. Posters of bands I didn't recognize plastered the walls, and his guitar leaned against the desk, strings glinting in the low light. Max lay on his side, facing away from me, his broad back rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. The sheet had slipped down to his waist, exposing the lean lines of his shoulders, the faint freckles dotting his skin. For a moment I just stood there, watching him, my chest tight with indecision. The air felt charged, heavy with possibility, and I couldn't turn back, not now. I slid into his bed, the mattress dipping under my weight, and pressed myself against him, my front to his back. He stirred, a low hum in his throat, and I froze, my breath catching as he rolled onto his back. His eyes fluttered open, bleary at first, then sharpening as he registered me there. "Lila." His voice was rough with sleep, confusion etching his brow, but I didn't answer, not with words. I reached for his hand, guiding it to my leg again, the same spot as before, and this time there was no hesitation in me. His fingers flexed against my skin, warm and firm, and I saw the shift in his eyes, surprise giving way to something darker, hungrier. "Lila, what?" he started, but I cut him off, leaning in to kiss him. It wasn't soft or tentative. It was bold, urgent. my lips crashing into his with all the tension that had been simmering since dinner. He stiffened for a heartbeat, then melted, his mouth opening under mine, hot and eager. My hands found his shoulders, pushing him down flat against the mattress as I swung a leg over him, straddling his hips. The weight of me pinned him there, and I felt him tense, then relax, his hand sliding up to grip my waist. The kiss deepened, slow and deliberate now, tongues tangling as I pressed myself closer, the heat of his chest searing through my thin dress. I pulled back just enough to look at him. His eyes half-lidded, lips swollen, chest heaving like he couldn't catch his breath. "God, Lila," he muttered, voice low and ragged, and it sent a shiver racing down my spine. My hands framed his face, thumbs brushing the rough stubble along his jaw, and I kissed him again. His cheek, his neck, the corner of his mouth, each one a spark igniting something wilder. His hands roamed, hesitant at first, then bolder, sliding up my back, tugging me down until our bodies pressed flush together. I could feel him, every shift, every twitch, and it drove me crazy the way he moved under me, subtle but desperate, like he wanted more but didn't know how to ask. My dress rode up, the fabric bunching around my thighs, and his fingers dug into my hips, pulling me tighter against him. I rocked forward, slow and deliberate, and he groaned. A low guttural sound that vibrated through me. My head tipped back, a shaky breath escaping as I set the pace, controlling every move, every press of my body against his. The room spun, the air thick with the scent of us, sweat, heat, need, and I lost myself in it, in him, in the way he looked up at me like I was unraveling him piece by piece. His hand slid lower, tracing the curve of my thighs, and I arched into it, my skin buzzing alive, every nerve screaming for more. "Do you have anything?" I whispered, my voice hoarse, barely audible over the pounding of my heart. His eyes widened, a flicker of panic cutting through the haze, and he shook his head, a sheepish grin tugging at his lips. "No, I didn't I didn't think," he trailed off, cheeks flushing. And I let out a frustrated laugh, half exasperated, half amused. "Seriously, Max? What kind of 18-year-old doesn't keep something in his room?" He shrugged, helpless, and I rolled my eyes, my head dropping to his chest as I tried to rein in the fire still licking through me. But I wasn't done, not even close. If we couldn't go all the way, I'd make damn sure he'd never forget this. I slid down his body, my lips brushing his collarbone, his stomach, feeling the way his muscles tensed under my touch. His breath hitched, sharp and uneven, as I settled between his legs, my hands running up his thighs. "Lila," he choked out, but I didn't stop, kissing lower, slower, savoring the way he squirmed, the way his fingers clenched the sheets. Every move I made pulled a reaction from him. A gasp, a shudder, a quiet curse, and it fueled me, this power, this control, the way I could unravel him with just a touch. The night blurred into a mess of sensation. His hands in my hair, my name on his lips, the way his body arched under me, helpless and raw. It wasn't perfect or polished, it was messy, real, and so damn good I couldn't think straight. When it was over, I pulled back, breathless, my skin still tingling as I watched him collapse against the pillows, chest heaving, eyes closed. He looked wrecked, undone. And it hit me hard, how much I'd wanted this, how much I still did. I stood, legs shaky, and cleared my throat, trying to sound casual. "You're not a virgin, right?" His eyes snapped open, a mix of confusion and amusement flickering there. And he nodded, voice soft but sure. "No," I raised a brow, studying him, then turned and slipped out of the room without another word. The hallway stretched long and dark before me, the silence pressing in as I leaned against the wall, my breath ragged. What the hell had I just done? Equals. The hallway swallowed me as I stumbled away from Max's room, the hardwood cold and unforgiving under my bare feet. My pulse still hammered, a frantic rhythm echoing in my ears, and my skin felt too tight, prickling with the aftershocks of what we'd done. I pressed my back against the wall, the plaster cool through my dress, and slid down until I was sitting, knees pulled to my chest. The house was dead quiet now, save for the faint hum of the fridge downstairs and the occasional creak of settling beams, sounds that used to lull me to sleep but now felt like they were mocking me. My breath came in shallow bursts, and I buried my face in my hands, trying to make sense of the storm churning inside me. It had felt so right in the moment. Max's hands on me, his breath against my skin, the way we'd moved together like we'd been waiting for it all along. But now, alone in the dark, guilt clawed its way up my throat, bitter and sharp. He was my brother, 18, sure, grown in ways that still startled me, but my brother. The word twisted in my gut, heavy with lines I'd cross without a second thought. Yet even as the shame burned, something else flickered beneath it, hunger raw and unapologetic, whispering that I'd do it again if I could. I squeezed my eyes shut, replaying every second. The heat of his mouth, the way his fingers had dug into my hips, the low groan he'd let slip when I'd pushed him past his limits. My body still hummed with it, traitor that it was, and I hated how much I craved more. Morning came too fast. Sunlight sliced through the blinds, painting my room in harsh gold stripes, and I dragged myself out of bed, every muscle aching like I'd run a marathon. The mirror showed a stranger, hair tangled, eyes shadowed, lips still faintly swollen from last night. I splashed cold water on my face, the shock of it jolting me awake, and pulled on a faded t-shirt and shorts, trying to bury the evidence under layers of normalcy. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled like coffee and burnt toast. Mom's signature chaos. She bustled at the counter, her apron streaked with flour, while Dad flipped through the paper, muttering about gas prices. Morning, sleepyhead, Mom chirped, sliding a mug my way. I forced a smile, the ceramic warm against my palms, and mumbled a thanks. Max shuffled in a minute later, his hair a mess, wearing a rumpled hoodie and jeans that hung low on his hips. He didn't look at me. Not really. Just grabbed a piece of toast and leaned against the counter, scrolling his phone. But I noticed everything. The way his jaw tensed when he chewed, the faint red mark on his neck where my lips had been, the subtle shift in his stance when I moved to refill my coffee. The air between us crackled, thick with secrets, and I wondered if Mom could feel it. The way the room seemed to shrink whenever we were too close. "You two okay?" she asked, glancing between us, her brow furrowing. Max nodded, quick and tight, and I shrugged, muttering something about still being tired. She let it drop, but her eyes lingered, sharp in that way Mom's always were. The day crawled by, a slow torture of stolen glances and overanalyzed silences. Max stuck around the house, sprawled on the couch with his guitar, plucking lazy chords that drifted through the open windows. I tried to busy myself, scrolling my phone, flipping through a book I didn't read, but my eyes kept drifting to him. The way his fingers moved over the strings, deft and sure, sent a shiver through me, too close to how they'd felt on my skin. Once he caught me staring, his hazel eyes locking on mine for a beat too long, and my heart lurched, heat flooding my face. He looked away first, strumming harder, and I bolted upstairs, needing distance, needing air. By evening, the tension was unbearable. Dad came into the living room where I sat, legs curled under me on the sagging plaid couch, pretending to care about some reality show flickering on the TV. "Hey kiddo," he said, his voice gruff but soft. "Your mom and I gotta run out, some paperwork at the shop. You'll be okay here." I nodded, waving him off with a smile I didn't feel. "Yeah, I'm good. Go handle it." He ruffled my hair like I was still 10, and then they were gone, the front door clicking shut behind them. The house fell silent again, a vast empty echo that pressed against my ribs. I heard Max before I saw him, his footsteps heavy on the stairs, then the soft thud of him dropping onto the other end of the couch. He didn't say anything, just stretched out, one arm slung over the backrest, his knee brushing mine for a split second before he shifted away. The TV droned on, some contestant yelling about a botched cake, but it was background noise to the pulse pounding in my ears. I stole a glance at him, his profile sharp in the flickering light, lips parted slightly, hair falling into his eyes. He looked relaxed, but I knew better. I could feel it, the same restless energy coiling in me, mirrored in the way his fingers tapped against the cushion. "Max," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet, rougher than I meant it to be. He turned his head, slow, deliberate, and met my gaze. "Yeah." His tone was casual, but his eyes weren't. They burned, searching, waiting. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, and shifted closer, the couch creaking under me. "About last night," I started, but the words died as he leaned in, closing the gap, his breath warm against my cheek. "Don't," he murmured, low and urgent. "Don't say it was a mistake." My heart stopped, then raced, and before I could think I was kissing him, hard, desperate, my hands fisting in his hoodie. He pulled me onto his lap, my knees bracketing his hips, and the world tilted. His mouth was fire, his hands everywhere, sliding up my thighs, gripping my waist, tugging me closer until there was no space left between us. I yanked his hoodie off, tossing it aside, my fingers tracing the hard lines of his chest, the faint scars from years of skateboarding and dumb teenage stunts. He groaned into my mouth, the sound vibrating through me, and I rocked against him, chasing that friction, that heat. My shirt hit the floor next, his hands roaming my bare skin, rough and reverent, and I arched into him, gasping as his lips found my neck, my collarbone lower. It wasn't enough, couldn't be enough. I shoved him back, pinning him against the cushions, and he let me, his hands settling on my hips as I took over. The living room spun around us, the faded rug, the crooked lamp, the hum of the TV fading to static, until it was just him, just me, just this. His breath came in ragged bursts, his eyes locked on mine, and I felt powerful, alive, every move deliberate, every touch a claim. We didn't stop, couldn't stop, pushing each other further, harder, until the tension snapped, and I collapsed against him, trembling, his arms wrapping around me like he'd never let go. When it was over, we lay there, tangled on the couch, the air thick with sweat and silence. His chest rose and fell beneath me, his heart beat a steady thud against my ear, and I traced lazy circles on his skin, too spent to move. "Lila," he whispered, his voice raw, and I tilted my head to look at him. His eyes were soft now, unguarded, and it hit me what we'd done, what it meant, what it might cost. I pulled away, sitting up, my hands shaking as I grabbed my shirt and tugged it on. "I need to think," I muttered, standing, my legs unsteady. He didn't stop me, just watched, his expression unreadable, as I stumbled upstairs. I locked myself in my room, pacing the worn carpet, my mind a war zone. It was wrong, had to be wrong, but it didn't feel that way, not when his touch still lingered, not when my body still ached for him. I sank onto the bed, staring at the ceiling, those damn stars blurring as tears stung my eyes. Was this who I was now? Someone who'd chase a thrill past every boundary, past reason? Or was it something else? Something real, something I couldn't outrun? I didn't know, and the not knowing gnawed at me, a hollow ache that wouldn't go. The next morning Max was gone. Out with friends, Mom said, casual as she flipped pancakes. I nodded, sipping my coffee, but the house felt emptier without him, the silence louder. I spent the day drifting, replaying every moment, every touch, every look, and by nightfall I still didn't have answers. Just questions piling up like storm clouds. When he came home late, his footsteps echoed in the hall, pausing outside my door. I held my breath, waiting, but he didn't knock. Just stood there, a shadow under the crack of light, then walked away. And I lay there wide awake, wondering what happened next. Wondering if I'd let it happen again. This story's a tangle of heat and heart. A dive into the messy electric pull between two people who shouldn't fit but somehow do. Writing it felt like walking a tightrope. Balancing the raw desire with the weight of what it all means. Leaving it open for you to wrestle with too. What do you think? Did Lila cross a line she can't uncross? Or is this just the start of something bigger? I'd love to hear your take. Drop a like, a comment, maybe a sub if you're hooked. Part 2's brewing if you want it, so let me know. For now, I'll leave you with Lila, staring at those stars, caught between guilt and wanting, waiting for whatever comes next.